Greetings and peace to you, folks who are joining our live stream today. Welcome to Piecing It Together with Annika and Ben. I am Ben.
And I am Annika.
Now, some folks may be asking why a scrappy little baby podcast like ours, with, I don't even know if we have listeners, but I'm sure we have some, would be so bold as to offer what we're calling counter programming to an event like the Inauguration, which, by the way, I am monitoring, so you don't have to. The answer to the question is, we have watched over the last weeks the surrender, frankly, of media outlets, of politicians, of other paths of resistance, offering kind of an anticipatory obedience, which some books have warned us about. And so it's clear that the counter narrative to what is happening is getting weaker. And so every voice matters. We are entering a fraught, stressful, and potentially dangerous period in American history. Somebody has to be willing to speak a different kind of narrative in the nation. So any one of us who have any access to any public platform, big or small, should probably speak up now. The time to start talking about this is now. We are all here gathered together as people of faith, Presbyterians and others. We speak for a set of values and ideas that are in opposition to the proposed policies and practices that we have already seen developing throughout today. So far, democracy still allows us to express ourselves. And when all is said and done, it may well be progressive, for lack of a better word, churches and other nonprofit and human organizations that end up standing out as the bulwarks against what is happening. So for my guests gathered here, I'm going to let you introduce yourself as you answer the first question. And so just you can tell us who you are, what organization you're with. But I'm going to start by asking you an incredibly unfair question, because I like to do that. So this morning, as I was doing my morning reading time, I had the TV on in the background. I wasn't really paying attention, but then suddenly I heard somebody say this: the traditional American values of ignorance, insensitivity, and irrational behavior. As we wait for this inauguration to happen, which is underway, my first question is this: is this who we are? And I will start with Angela.
Great, Ben. Thank you so much. First, I want all of us, I invite my co-panelists and our hosts and anyone watching or listening this, to start by taking a deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. This is deep work, and we need you for the long haul. My name is Reverend Angela Tyler Williams. My pronouns are she and her, and I am proud to serve as the co-executive director for Movement Building of Sacred, the spiritual alliance of communities for reproductive dignity. We work with congregations and faith communities from all sorts of faiths all across the country to interrogate and investigate how our religious traditions support reproductive justice. Now, how I started are exactly the words that I put into Sacred's call to action after the draft SCOTUS opinion leaked in May 2022, which foreshadowed what we presumed would happen, the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And Ben, you're right. We are in this moment of anxiety, uncertainty, commitment, dread, resolution, fear, dis-ease, possibility, exhaustion, and anticipation that is filling us at the personal, communal, national, and global worlds. I think we're in foundation cracking times that can shift our axis of gravity, and that we're living through apocalypse. And Sacred has been going through this season of apocalypse, guided by our Director of Programmatic Operations and Hospitality, Reverend Lindsay Godwin, through the lens of Catherine Keller offers us, of apocalypse not being the end times, the end of the world, judgment day, but of a revealing, a pulling back of what has sort of always been there. And so I am inclined to say yes, that is sort of who we are, but it is not all of who we are. My personal reaction to the election results from November was starting to put things into a different perspective and taking a longer view and really listening to the prophets and leaders and speakers like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., like Audre Lorde, like Octavia Butler, who have told us that this is who we are. I think there was a big moment when President Barack Obama was elected and it was like, oh, we've turned the page. We're in a new space. But seeing this sort of backlash back and forth helps me to sort of situate, like, I think those were the anomalies. I think President Biden winning was a little bit of an anomaly. And so we are going back to the original sins of this country and of its founding, founded on settler colonialism, founded on white supremacy, founded on chattel slavery. And I think we have to be really, really honest about that as we continue to move forward.
Thank you. Yes, as you were talking, it just popped into my head. I kind of feel like I'm not as freaked out as I should be, but I'll get into that later. Marietta.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you all today. My name is Reverend Marietta Macy. I use she, they pronouns. I am currently serving as the co-moderator of the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church USA. We are a mandated mission network of the PCUSA, created in 2004. We do a variety of things. I encourage folks to check that out, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But one of the main distinctions that's important to know about us is we are an official mission network of the PCUSA, but we speak to the church, not for the church. So a lot of the work that we've done over the years is that forward thinking work of where do we need to go? Where are our partners telling us their lives are taking all of us together, and then work to educate and advocate within the denomination to move forward those realities and those stances and those actions of solidarity. So that's just an important distinction to make for us. Ben, could you repeat those three adjectives that were in that quote?
Oh, sure. In ignorance, insensitivity, and irrational behavior.
Yeah, I would love to say that's not who we are, but I think it is. But also my work and my background is in education with all ages of people. And so my perspective on something like that is, yeah, I think that is who we are right now. It's who we've been periodically over the years, but it's not the whole version of who we are, and it's not who we have to stay. I there's always an opportunity to change and grow, especially with knowledge and education and listening to other wise folks. So I hope that that's not where we're stuck for the next several years. But one of the grounding principles that I learned in Palestine, planting olive trees, is a Greek proverb, but I learned it in Palestine, that societies grow great when old people plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. So going into this administration and anything else that comes in the next lifetime of ours, I hope that we all can take that much longer term view, that while we may not get to see us work ourselves out of this this ignorance and these other adjectives, that if we don't do this work now, we never will see the end of that. So that's part of where my hope comes from when we're faced with the reality of where we are as a country.
Mike?
Yeah, thanks for allowing a Mennonite to crash this party a little bit. I'm Mike Martin. I'm Executive Director of Raw Tools here in Colorado Springs. We have other affiliates across the country too that some folks might be familiar with. And we work at turning guns into garden tools and connecting people to nonviolent conflict resolution skills, which that idea can be stressed at this time. I think any honest person who strives for nonviolence can think of times when they've been tempted to use other things, even with the people that they love. So I think all this work and all these things that are happening right now, I resonate with a lot of restorative work. So I'm kind of a hopeless romantic in that way. I have to always find something positive. Otherwise, I just crumble up into a ball. And so I try and see moments like these as opportunities. I resonate deeply with breath work. I'm so glad that Reverend Tyler Williams opened her response with that. And it's been such an important part of my learning over the last 12 years in restorative and transformative justice work. And those adjectives seem to resonate with me when people are in the midst of conflict and they don't necessarily know the solution and there isn't a plan. And so I think one of the most helpful things that we can do as leaders in our community, as points of contact with our friends and family, is to offer healthy practices, to one, kind of receive um, things that harm us and be able to let them pass through or pass by, and to deal with them when we need to, but also to show up in support, because nonviolence doesn't work if it's just shared from the pulpit or the lectern and your body isn't also put in harm's way with those most affected. So this is certainly a unique time in our history, and certainly in my lifetime. um, I think this work of, Raw Tools describes it as disarming hearts, forging peace, and cultivating justice. And to do that, we lean heavily on things like the prophetic imagination that Walter Brueggemann talks about. And I think this ignorance that we see, also, like, it can be willful ignorance, but it can also be this ignorance that people just don't know better. And it's when we keep siloing ourselves, um, it's easier not to know better across different silos. And so the more work we can do to try and create safe spaces to learn about each other better, the more prophetic we can be in that space. And there's a favorite quote that I'll end with here from Brueggemann that was really the seed for our work. And it's, to paraphrase, it says that, our imaginations have been so co-opted by what Brueggemann calls the royal consciousness, we can say the American consciousness, that we have lost the courage or power or will to think an alternative thought. And so I think it's our work to help bring about these alternative thoughts, these other ways. And I think folks will hear some of that here today.
Yeah, as you were talking, I'm going to move from Brueggemann to Thomas Merton, because I'm a Benedictine oblate, and that's what we do. But I've been listening to a lot of Thomas Merton post-election, for a very intentional reason, because he's a calming presence. But he makes this point that leads me to answer my own question with no. And the reason is, Thomas Merton has suggested that in our fallen state, we have begun to accept unnatural things as natural. And those unnatural things are violence, division, hate, injustice, these things that we were not built for. These are not how God programmed us. And so his suggestion, right, is that if we can begin to see these things as not inevitable and not natural, then we can begin to understand them as things to be overcome, right? Sins that can be redeemed. And so I too hold out that hope, right? I'm going to be brutally honest. I think it's going to take a hard and awful lesson for us to learn this. But I do think at some point, right? I think Merton's words may bear out that we begin to understand that this is not, right? It doesn't have to be this way, right? We don't have to be violent people. We don't have to be selfish people. So with that, Annika, I will shoot it over to you. Feel free to answer the question yourself too.
Yeah, I'll speak on the question briefly and introduce myself briefly too. I am Reverend Annika Gage. I am serving as the co-moderator of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship and as Ben's co-host on this podcast. If you are one of our early listeners, thank you. And if you are
Introduce yourself.
interested, you didn't. You got to get on that next time. But I'm also going to briefly, shamelessly plug, we are here Tuesdays and Thursdays, not live casting. If you would like to continue to hear from folks like the people on this panel. But in answer to the question, are we inherently ignorant, insensitive, irrational? I think I have to answer with no. And that's an answer given on faith. That is in itself a bit of an irrational answer because I know demonstrably we are. But I think Reverends Tyler Williams and Mike Martin have already spoke on this, but I think we act that way when we are traumatized, right? We act that way when we don't feel safe. We act that way when we have been disempowered. And I think we're in a spot where historically we are a country just swimming in unresolved generational trauma inflicted on ourselves and each other, and just the ongoing traumas of poverty, of generational violence, all of it. All of us are, I think, just that's baked into our bodies. And so when I see people acting ignorant, insensitive, and when I feel myself pulling back and not wanting to extend trust, I don't think that's coming from an inherent damned human state. I think that's coming from an atmosphere that's just been so toxic for so long. And yeah, I think extending trust when you're traumatized is also a hell of a thing to do. And that's what makes this moment feel so intimidating for me. But I also recognize, okay, where are the spaces where I can get past my own ignorance and sensitivity and irrationality? Where are the spaces in which I can access that sense of maybe there's something better? And it's when I can get in touch with people trying to do the same thing. And also more basically, I think just when I can get in touch with people. Like, I think that the space I do that in best is actually very, very, very local. It's with my neighbors whose names I know, we do a pretty good job keeping tabs on each other, not in a big brother is watching you way, but in a like, we know each other. We know each other's names. We know each other's kids. We kind of know each other's schedules. And we've been able to navigate things that could have escalated in ways that are really stupid without that, because we recognize there's a human under there. And I recognize there's actually a desire to help each other once that trust is built. And so that's another reason I think I can't fully give into the idea that humans are just ignorant, insensitive, and irrational, because I know humans who are, when they're scared and when they feel like they're up against an enemy that they don't know or doesn't care about them, but who that just, it's a night and day difference when we know who the heck we're talking to.
Yeah, I kind of looked at them as responses, not like, you know, states of being, right? You respond irrationally, you respond with, these kinds of things. So yeah, that's a good point. Do you have a question you'd like to ask?
I will. Yeah, I think the thing on my mind, you talked, you had a kind of a statement about humanity. I think I've been thinking a lot about fear, because I think I'm grappling a lot with fear right now. This feels like this does, in potential contrast to what I just said about humanity, this feels a little bit like a statement of our values as a country, and it's not great. I'm not thrilled about it. I also, work in a priest fellowship that has also in a lot of ways been operating in this space for a long time, in a space where military culture is so prevalent, in a space where violence is so prevalent, and we are working to be an alternative to that. So it's also not a new practice to think about, okay, what are some alternatives to living in this world? And so with that in mind, I think my question for the group, and my invitation as well to let folks who are listening who might also be looking for ways to live into an alternative type of space know, what are you and your organizations most concerned about or focused on right now? And how would you invite folks in? And can I extend an invite to Reverend Marietta Macy first?
Yeah. I'm just thinking still more about this first question though in that quote. Part of what stuck out to me in that was that those aren't human values, those are American values. And that so they're not inherent to humanity. You all are correct in that. That's not where we're supposed to be. But that we're in an American system that's designed by and to uphold white supremacy and patriarchy and a colonial mentality. And those three evils need us to live up to those adjectives to not object and interrupt those systems. So that's where I would say our current system requires us and forces us as Americans to fall into the traps of being ignorant, of not knowing enough to object to these systems and interrupt them. So I want to lift up that, but this really does lead into what our work is. And a lot of that is around education and advocating for disenfranchised and oppressed peoples in general, intersectionally, because all of these issues come together in Palestine in a very, very tangible way. We often fall into the trap also of Americans trying to help in these situations by taking our white supremacist and colonial mentalities to other nations or other issues to try to project what our own solutions would be onto them. So a part of our work is helping us as Americans kind of unlearn some of the solutions or some of the trends that we've been taught to support that end up just perpetrating these cycles of injustice and cycles of violence continuously. So we have some exciting things coming up this year. Our General Assembly is happening next year also. We'll begin working on that and thinking, as I said, we speak to the church, not for the church. So we're working on seeing where do we need to be as the church and helping facilitate people to speak and act and influence at that General Assembly level. We also will be sponsoring a trip to Palestine. We also connect folks with other trips that are going. We work ecumenically and across faith lines for all of our work. So this isn't just a Presbyterian specific group and action. Everything we do includes others as well. There will also be more opportunities for online education, for consultations with churches, with your community groups to help connect you with resources that can help you do this learning process or unlearning process, and getting a solid foundation of knowledge for what's going on in Palestine so that you can respond in a faithful way. We will be looking to see where the Spirit moves us. We're investigating right now, also working to fundraise to add some staff to our Palestine Justice Network. So I encourage you all to continue checking that out and support that. We would love to be able to spend more time creating resources that exactly answer and respond to these questions and so many that folks have. I'm in the midst of a cross-country tour right now with a dear friend and activist and teacher from Palestine, Baha Hilo. And we're in Pittsburgh currently. We'll be headed all the way to the West Coast. But one of the responses that we've gotten, no matter what kind of group it is that we're talking to, is how grateful they are to hear directly from people who are impacted by these realities. Because again, as Americans, we're taught to other and to remove ourselves, and especially with this issue, fall into that ignorance trap that the empire relies on, that this is just too complicated and I can't get involved. I just don't know enough. It's not my place. But it is. As a humanitarian issue, as people of faith, we should always be concerned about what's happening to our siblings. So our work in a variety of ways is trying to assist with that and help make connections like we're making this morning across different disciplines and ways of work and activism to move to a more just world.
Thank you. Mike Martin, what are you all up to at Raw Tools right now?
Yeah, we have regular programming called Guns to Gardens that Presbyterian Peace Fellowship is a training partner for, and a ton of folks are active in that. And it's essentially teaching congregations how to hold what's called a safe surrender event. People would recognize it maybe more like a traditional buyback, except whenever possible, law enforcement isn't present, which means that we have anywhere from 15 to 50 volunteers on site helping people go through the process of safely disposing of their firearms. They're destroyed in front of them. But then they're also connected to other folks. Those volunteers are people who've been affected by gun violence. So really trying to kind of close some of these gaps to these issues. I think Reverend Macy was talking about, like, be in person with people, hear directly from folks who've been affected, really cuts through all the disinformation that folks are hearing. So trying to make those bridges as much as possible. And even it was kind of like this offhand thing, Annika, that you said about it's a hell of a thing to extend trust, especially people who've been harmed. And it really is a type of hell to be asked, almost paradoxically, to extend trust to someone who may not have directly harmed you, but could be associated with that harm. And it takes a lot to take that step. So we want to support folks who are doing that. And that can take a lot of space in this mental health first aid trainings that we're looking to bring on staff for. Not just, we take everything that people turn in at those Guns to Gardens events, including gun cases, and the handgun cases are about the same shape as first aid kits. And so we're turning those into mental health first aid kits, but to allow them to be client informed. So what goes inside there is by choice of the people who will take it home, and to have their support community help them fill that up and see, like, hey, we're here with you, expand the circles of care. If people are familiar with Silk's ring theory of support, that support goes inside each ring, and at the center of the ring is a person who was affected by trauma, and then the next ring out is by their choice, right? Who they want to support them directly, and then the next ring out might be friends, and then the larger communities. Well, support goes in, and complaints and rage, all that gets to go out. And so being able to fill out those rings and teach people how to navigate those rings is really important to our work. I'm also a part of the Mennonite Anabaptist tradition, and tomorrow is our 500-year anniversary. And we were birthed out of a separation of church and state. And so all of these events and these activities are churches and other faith communities, community organizations saying that it is a protest to this ignorance, this anxiety and fear, to say that this is not who we are. And so it is this fluid thing, right? We can be caught into these valleys where we feel like that is what we are, but then we also need those around us to help pull us out of those spaces. And these events do that. One example is these people say, well, the bad guys with guns aren't going to be turning in these guns at these events. Well, these events also train churches to destroy firearms in between events. So they might be in relationship with folks on the street who get pulled in and out of that. And because of that training, they're having guns turned into them in trusted spaces that can be destroyed, and then also connected to other services. So there's multiple levels of this that help people kind of navigate this space and help provide space for critical thinking, to say, this, what I'm hearing, that doesn't make sense. The things I'm being told are happening in public schools, that doesn't make sense, because I talked to this teacher at our neighborhood school, or at the board level, whatever that is. And so we continue to try and create and cultivate space. That's really what Raw Tools is about, specific to gun violence, but also other pieces that make that happen. Gun violence happens in moments of scarcity and fear. And it's because a lot of other lines have been crossed. And those lines are everything that we're talking about today, whether that's loss of employment, loss of relationship, loss of connection to a community like a church even. So it's helping to build up kind of those pillars of our community. And it's really important, we believe, that faith spaces continue to speak up. And we want to provide them the programs and services to do so. Last thing then, and I think Ben mentioned this as we were talking beforehand, but my partner Hannah is a childhood educator and a associate pastor for families at our church. And she has a children's book called Sparking Peace coming out on April 8th. And it helps families and caregivers talk about gun violence in their own terms with the young ones in their home and in their circles. So that's another thing we'll be supporting heavily this spring.
Just FYI, the vice president has taken the oath of office.
Okay. Thank you for the update.
Sure. Yeah. Mary, whatever. Yeah.
Mary, whatever. Yes. Mike, I wanted to say too, I think it was you who mentioned like traumatized imaginations as playing a role into when we act ignorant, insensitive, and irrational. And I wanted to add one of the things that I really both admire and have been positively affected by out of Guns to Gardens particularly, and their work of giving folks a place to safely surrender weapons and then transforming weapons into tools and into art. You have tapped in really beautifully into the role that art and creation and recreation can play in that healing that trauma. Because one of the narratives that I am haunted by is just how many guns there are in the US. And I understand that is not a problem that's going anywhere anytime soon. But the ability to tell people, like, especially working in, I've worked in medical centers and worked with survivors of gun violence, and to be able to let them know, like, hey, if the weapon that inflicted this harm is still floating around and you're not sure what to do with it, here's an option. They're going to break it down. They're going to turn it into something else. Ben, can I put you on the spot to show off? Because you have jewelry that was from a weapon that was melted down.
This was the barrel of a gun.
Yes. That is, to quote a friend who I recently was chatting about raw tools with, rad as hell. And it really does. I think it helps me anyway, break through that mindset of like, we're just screwed. Because we're not.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but as you're talking, they are literally shooting giant guns in Washington, D.C. right now.
Well, listen, we're over here building an alternative world, okay? So, yes, looking forward to meeting those guns at a meltdown event one day. But anyway, thank you for what you do, truly, and for the artful role that your work has too. Yes, we have more resources to share. Reverend Angela Tyler Williams, tell us what you're up to at Sacred.
Yeah. I'm trying to decide where all to begin, because so many people have said things that really resonate and like help to illustrate why we do what we do at Sacred. So what Sacred is and what we do is that we are a national multi-faith, multiracial alliance of congregations, movement organizations, activists, academics, and directly impacted communities collaborating to advance reproductive justice. We do that through congregational education, culture change, community building, and direct service. And so you might not necessarily be familiar with the reproductive justice framework, so I'm happy to share a little bit more about what that is. Reproductive justice is a framework developed by 12 Black and Indigenous women in 1994 in response to the Clinton administration's healthcare reform work. And these women came together and said, we're fighting about abortion, but like that doesn't actually meet the needs of us and our communities. We can have a legal right to something, but if we can't access that, do we actually have that right? So they developed this framework that is rooted in reproductive rights, social justice, and human rights, and all seen through the lens of Black feminism. And the 4 tenets are the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, the human right to have a child, the human right not to have a child, and the human right to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. So under that umbrella, I see all of the work that we're talking about today fitting into that of making spaces where people can have children, where they can not have children, where they can maintain personal bodily autonomy and parent the children they have in safe and sustainable communities. And so what Sacred does in this and how we plug into the framework is working with congregations and faith-based communities to really interrogate what that means and what that looks like. So we have developed a sacred curriculum that is intended for small group use. And we have a train the trainer model. So we train folks to be able to facilitate this in their own local communities. And the curriculum goes through all sorts of things. And it's about abortion, but it is also not, because it is rooted in reproductive justice, which includes abortion, but is not exclusive to all of these other important justice issues like gun violence, like justice in Palestine, like peace and anti-militarism, like anti-white supremacy, like anti-racism work, like trans inclusion and celebration. So we're trying to build all of these things together, and we get folks to do that interrogation work in their internal life, in the life of that congregation and that faith community, as well as in their local community and the state and national level. And so we have been busy revising this curriculum for the past couple of years, actually. And it is coming into its final phases. And so we're going to launch a revised version of this curriculum in May in New Orleans, May 5th and 6th in New Orleans. We'll have a 12-hour facilitator training led by some really wonderful folks. And that is really, okay, what do we need to learn? Like, what is the theory? But then also, what is the praxis? And so it leads us through action planning of, okay, what are the needs in our communities? What are we seeing that's specific to us? Because we are living in such fragmented states these days. Some folks are in, particularly around abortion care and services, some folks are in high access places and they are receiving folks traveling to receive care. Others are in heavily restricted areas. And so the types of action that you do in those particular places looks really different. The types of risk you're engaging in to provide that care and show up pastorally, compassionately for folks in your community has to look a little different. So it walks folks through that and also gives folks some language and some space to wrestle with. Unfortunately, the religious right has, and the forces of white Christian nationalism have dominated the conversation around abortion and faith in particular, to the point that folks don't even realize that there is a strong force of over 50 years of support for abortion, abortion access, abortion providers, compassionate care for folks from particularly mainline Christian traditions. I'll highlight that, but particularly our Jewish partners are like, this is not our issue. These bans violate our religious freedom. Our Muslim partners are like, this is not a thing. This is not a thing for us. Why do we have to live under these Christian laws or laws that come from a very narrow understanding of Christianity? So we are taking back that narrative. We are taking back that political space, and we are preparing our folks to do that work in their community and to show up and support other partner organizations. So we don't necessarily do the political stuff, but I can tell you all the organizations in your community that are doing the political things and will benefit from you volunteering with them and all sorts of great things.
Nice. I think that there's an inherent tension there that's also relevant of the recognition that white Christian nationalism really does rule the day in the US when we talk about religious culture. And also this refusal to cede the narrative that like that is the only way to be a person of faith in the world. Because it's ridiculous. There's just been damn good organizing and PR to make folks assume. And I think that's power maybe folks like you and I have too.
Yeah. Well, and almost unlimited funding. We cannot remove that from the conversation, that there is an unlimited amount of funding available to those who occupy now. I don't remember. I think it was like NPR did a thing. Is like, is theocracy at power's doorstep? Yes, because of unlimited funding. And those of us are scrappy and competing all over the place to try and get some little measly dollars to go towards this big transformative, imaginative, liberative visions that we want to see in the world. And we can't ignore that that is another power imbalance that we're seeing.
You know, I think other folks too. If you want to jump in, just do it. We get wild after a while. But so I don't think I don't think theocracy is a strong enough word. So I mean, what we're witnessing really is a rise of Christian nationalism
Mm-hmm.
that we can't fully guess how damaging it is going to be. Because look, folks, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. Christian nationalism is a violent ideology. It is an ideology of division. It is an ideology of separatism. It is a white supremacist ideology. And you can pretend it's not all you want. But it now has a friend in the White House and plenty of friends in Congress who can actually do stuff. So, you know, if they get their way, that's scary shit. Pardon my French, right? But the other thing that I think of is, where are the mainline churches? Like, why is our hair not on fire that this is happening? I mean, I'm a Presbyterian. Democracy matters to us a lot. The idea, right, that the Presbyterian Church isn't lit on fire by the idea that democracy is at risk is disturbing, frankly. So, you know, I'm a small church pastor, first and foremost. I'm the pastor of the fierce little church in Scipioville, New York. I'm also a chaplain, and you know, I do some spiritual direction, and there's this kind of paralysis. You know, as I meet with people and talk to people, this kind of, what do we do, right? And my response is always, we do what we do every day, right? We work for justice. We walk humbly with God. We love kindness, right? But I think I want to focus in, Angela, on two populations, because I think there are two populations who are particularly you know, there are lots of populations particularly at risk. But one, I'm a gay man, a married gay man to my husband for 21 years, right? We're scared. You know, I'm not going to lie. We don't know what is going to happen. I know that one of the very first executive orders declares there are only two genders. So obviously there's an assault on the LGBTQ community, trans people, I think, being at the top of that list. And then women, right? Women have been kicked in the face so many times over these last years. You know, can you speak to those populations, and sort of, you know, what can we do to be, I don't know, just a force of support?
Mm-hmm. I'll say, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and say something that applies to all of these things. You talked about the force of white Christian nationalism. Yes, they have been at this for 40 years. And these are the forces that are spreading disinformation and misinformation that pit individuals and communities against each other. This is the force that is stoking the flames of fire of the war machine. And which wars over which year, like, it just depends over 40, 50, 60, 75, 80 years. 80 years of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, all of that. That they are benefiting from our fear and violence. To bring it all the way back to Annika's feeling right now, they benefit when we are afraid and when we are fighting against each other. And it has been sort of behind the scenes and now is emboldened out in the front. And what that does is continue to dehumanize us. I hear you, Ben. I'm a bisexual woman married to my beloved wife, and the threats of abortion access already under attack, but the way that is creeping into IVF access, that directly impacts us and all LGBTQ folks wanting to make a family through biological reproduction, however we do that. It is on our front doorsteps, and it is, I would really paint a strong picture, because all of our liberation is tied up with each other, but I think trans folks are, and trans children are on the front lines being targeted, attacked, scapegoated, and that is who we have to show up for. Trans kids, trans women, Black trans women, folks who are incarcerated, immigrant trans women and men and non-binary folks, like that. All of these folks who are multiply marginalized are the people most at risk at this very moment. And we have got to keep our eyes open to that and pull out all the stops. It is not a matter of arguing. And I guess I'll say, like, yes, this man is going to put out a bunch of executive orders. And what is it that we truly know? Who is our source of authority? For me, as Presbyterian pastor, my authority comes from God. And I know what call God has put on my life. I know the ways that I have seen the divine work in world, in relationship, through the beauty and divinity of trans folks. And no executive order is going to change my understanding. No executive order is going to change what I know to be true about women, no matter what the patriarchal church has said for generations. And the ways that we've moved against that, but only to a certain extent, because being a woman in ministry is hard and complicated in its own way. And how do we get in our own ways about that? But just reconnecting to that divine source, clarifying who is our authority, where do we get knowledge from? And I think that has to be in relationship. A couple of folks have mentioned that, like hyper local, who are embodied relationships with people, and how does that inform what we know, and then how we move based on what we know, that does not get distracted by the noise that is here and that is going to keep coming.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in real quick. The president-elect is giving his speech, and he just said, "I believe God saved me from assassination to make America great again." So I'll just throw that out there, and you can do what you want. But Annika, do you have any questions?
My response to that is bless his heart. And my response, Angela, as you were mentioning, just care for each other. I wanted briefly I'm looking at the chat that is rolling in this meeting. Barbara has shared her solidarity of being appalled at violence in the country, and also asked, a major concern today is what any of us can do to help the people who are under the threat of deportation, who I would argue definitely fall under that very high risk. I don't have specific strategies, but I do think truly one big one is what Angela has just said, of like, learn who your neighbors are, learn the names of the families, learn who's in your space, because that is at the most basic level. If they find themselves in need of somebody to turn to for support so that they are not home when there's a knock on their door, like, you can be that person. All that starts with that relationship building, though. And I've got a hunch. I would welcome Reverend Marietta Macy to confirm or clarify. But I think part of that larger work is doing the global work and solidarity work, so that there is not as much violence that people have to flee from. Because it's the fewer places you have being destroyed, the fewer homes and countries you have being destroyed by colonialist violence, the fewer refugees that then get scapegoated in their home countries. Reverend Macy, is there anything else that you would want to add to that?
Yeah, just a few thoughts. I've realized with this, as the inauguration is happening, with the times that we're headed into, I don't have the level of fear that maybe I think I should, but I think that's coming from the deconstruction that I've gone through in the last few years, that we're not losing democracy now. We never had it. This is America, this nation of this ideal of freedom and it's a land of plenty and promise where you can come and make whatever. That's always been a lie. We're fearing right now the loss of an illusion that we never had for most of us. That dream has only ever been was only ever designed to apply to a very particular class of white man, and not even all of them. And so, as we've had in modern times, the grasps at freedom to live into our full identities in all of these ways that we're talking, that I really think that was just to pacify us, so that we stay in that cycle of ignorance and don't object to the mandates of the empire that we're living under. And also, I'm seeing the connections. We're talking about Christian nationalism and the influence it's getting ready to have. That's also already been, from day one. I just did a presentation last night on the connections between Christian Zionism, Israeli Zionism, and Christian nationalism. And when you get down to it, they are the same system. They are prioritizing a particular group of people. They create apartheid systems. And we don't have that in the same manifest way here in this country yet, but it's the foundation that we're all built on, that there are some people that are more chosen and more special than others, and the rights that those people have will not ever, and they're not meant to be accessible to everyone. And I also was just going back to Mike's, one of the things that you said, that gun violence happens in scarcity and fear. And as we're looking at this in a global context, that applies everywhere, that we're looking and saying, why are those people so violent there? But we've exported these systems that we're now the victims of here, because they've gotten to the level that they have. They've gotten the support, the financial support, the media time, the figureheads that they have. But we've exported those systems all around the world. And, the chickens are coming home to roost. We're seeing this influx of immigrants, of refugees that need to find safety, and they're trying to come here to find it. And I pray that they do. But the only reason that we have these things happening, that we have the explosion of violence in Palestine, in Gaza, that shocked so many people, is because we were stuck in that intentionally ignorant place that the empire puts us, to distract us from the ways that we were supporting and creating those systems of fear and scarcity around the world. So it's really all coming together. And I think that maybe the gift of this administration, which may be a strange way to think about it, but is to help us remove the blinders that we've had on for so long, and recognize that our liberation and our freedom, no matter what levels of privilege we have here in the US, because we do know they are all very different. And as a woman in ministry, I'm resonating with you, Angela, and you're sharing those specific difficulties. And I live in Charleston, West Virginia. I grew up in rural Southern Indiana. Mike Pence and I went to the same college, and I lived in his hometown and did ministry there for years. So these things are so intertwined here that I would say the gift of this ministry is to help us see this for what it is, to see the American story and the American lie for what it is. And when we can see that, then we can work clearly towards creating a better world for everyone, for all these issues that we're concerned about. But until we have a real, honest and candid sense of who we are, where we've been, and where we came from, we can't really do the work of undoing these systems that's causing this damage in reproductive rights, in getting rid of, ideally, gun violence, and all of these types of violence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually made me think, Mike, I was going to ask you, scarcity and fear seem to have been defining principles in this last election cycle. And so, the idea that I'm concerned, right, that political violence has been normalized in a way that it hasn't been before. At least, I mean, it has been before, right? But it's getting extreme again, right?
Yeah.
And so to the point that in some cases it's almost the first response. So as you're a person who sort of confronts violence as a reality in our world, what are you looking at? You know, what is your outlook? I mean, this is going to be difficult.
Yeah, and I think several of us mentioned the long game earlier. I don't think we can lose sight of that, and especially leaning on our Indigenous friends and colleagues who think about 7 generations ahead, and where restorative practices are based in. We have to be thinking about that tree whose shade we won't be under. It connects to the vine and fig tree in Micah that is attached to Isaiah's vision of turning swords into plowshares. That to find a place where we're sheltered by something that produces sustenance for us, and be in fear of no other. There's a lot of work that has to happen in our systems and in ourselves. And I think when I say scarcity and fear, that's in the person pulling the trigger or pushing the button. And the victim, the one on the other side of the gun, is the people are who hold those multiple marginalized identities. The more of those you hold, the more at risk of violence you are. Not the more likely you are to enact violence on other people, but the more scarce resources are to you. So there's this evil paradox that the more fear and anxiety someone who has a lot access to resources and privilege pulls the trigger and affects those who actually don't have access to those things. And so I think all of that comes back to this ability to rationalize pulling the trigger or enacting violence, and that happens when we dehumanize each other. And we can't, like, this love of others and love of enemies is really, really hard to do. And in our brain, we can pit these ideologies against each other. And to make them work in real life, we have to find a scapegoat, or we have to dehumanize something, or we have to elevate our own humanity so far above theirs that it's worth taking their life or harming them in such a way that they can't take from us anymore, whatever that illusion was. So for me, this hyper local work is really, really important. We do have to know our neighbors. We have to, like, do a little extra, carry the pack the extra mile sometimes. And those of us who do identify as the privileged spot, like myself, being a white cishet male Christian in Colorado Springs, I have access to most spaces here that other people don't. So those folks who have access to the privilege and resources, need to be putting our bodies and resources in conspiring places with folks who don't have those. We have to not just there's a lot of language of elevating ally to accomplice to co-conspirator. Whatever it is that puts your body in harm's way is the thing that you should probably be doing when you have a lot of privilege. So that's the way to work hyper locally. Like Reverend Tyler Williams said, that there's churches who are active know the organizations that need help. So talk to those organizations locally and ask where they need help, even if it's just setting up chairs for an event or running sound or something that's probably going to be behind the scenes. And don't be expected to be patted on the back or recognized. Just know that the people who need the help are going to get it when you show up that way. And that will affect change. And it will start to engender trust in each other the more we cross those lines, and bring resources with each other and hear each other's stories. The biggest thing that we do at a lot of our events is center survivors of gun violence to tell their story. And then they come to the anvil and they physiologically release their grief and pain through the hammer and into something that hurt them, while simultaneously transforming it into something else. I believe that's happening when we listen to folks who've been affected by our political systems, by our church institutional systems, and see the effect they've had on them, to see it firsthand, not through some soundbite or a real feed on our phones, but to hear and listen to people firsthand creates the humanity that we've been told not to put on those folks. So the more we see each other as human, the more we will not be okay with this ignorance and violence that we're told needs to happen to make us safe, because it isn't. We can think of the folks asking us to be violent are also the ones who create bomb shelters, when really the shelter is our community and each other. So the more you're told to harden a place, I try and resist as much as possible, because it's not, no one, there's learning doesn't happen there if we harden our schools and churches and spaces like that. We have to be vulnerable to move forward. And that,
Nobody ever talks about softening the rest of us, right?
right. Yeah. This is
Right.
it. And, we have a curriculum called Fear Not, which is developing a plan to respond to active violence without arming our ushers at our churches. So explore that, have that conversation with your peers and see, because you need to know who's uncomfortable and comfortable in certain situations to respond in a healthy way and not further enact trauma on people who might have gone through it in the past but haven't made that public yet.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Mike, everything you said is true, including, leveraging your privilege in order to mitigate risks that your neighbors can't. And I think the beauty of this relational work is like, it, even if you don't fancy yourself a capital A activist, you know how to do this already. If you are a member of a church, if you are a member of a family, if you are a member of a neighborhood, like this, I really do believe this starts with like talking to the people who you share space with. So even if those big high level strategies are feeling intimidating right now, start with introducing yourself to your neighbors, hand to God. Cause I really do believe and have seen in my own community that super soft, super fun, super get to know each other's kids and pets and have cookouts. That's going to lay the groundwork of trust so that when your community has bigger issues, you know who you're working with. And that removes the intimidation factor so much.
Big time.
So much. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about fun, but
well, just you don't find cookouts fun. I find cookouts fun. Whatever your version of fun is, throw a PowerPoint party. I don't care.
but no, I mean,
But,
to your point, though, I mean, one of the things that actually turned the tide on the attitude towards gay marriage in this country was relationship. It wasn't politics.
Media and like
Right.
positive fun sitcoms and yeah.
I mean, a lot of change is made through relationship, not necessarily through politics. They're not real good at it.
Yeah. I did want. Can I take the mic briefly to chat a little bit about what Presbyterian Peace Fellowship is working on?
Yeah, please do. I know we're getting close to
we are getting close to time. And we frankly, so the way that PPF is organized, we've got 5 core working groups, an accompaniment group, which is focused on global accompaniment predominantly. Colombia is our partner with the deepest historic roots, but we have been chatting about Gaza quite a bit because there's a big need there right now as well. Gun Prevention Working Group, which is how we got connected with the lovely Mike Martin and Raw Tools. Palestine Solidarity Working Group, that one is new, and that is in partnership with Palestine Justice Network and Reverend Mariana Macy to talk about what does good solidarity and advocacy look like for Gaza right now. Peace Church Working Group, which is probably where our deepest roots lie, that is figuring out how do you provide nonviolent solutions in a very violent world. And Presbyterians for Abolition, talking about how do we think about incarceration, how do we think about the justice system, what alternatives do we have in this country besides throwing people in jail for anything that money can't solve. If any of those topics resonate with you, I would welcome you to email info@presbypeacefellowship.org to join and see what those working groups are up to. There's also 3 projects I'm thinking specific to some of the topics that have come up here in relationship to the myth of losing something that Reverend Macy brought up. The Presbyterian Peace Fellowship started 80 years ago as a resource to gather clergy to support folks looking to register as conscientious objectors to World War II. We are now, in a lot of ways, returning to those roots and starting a coalition of War No More. PPF is one organization, basically, where we are working to put together resources for folks who want to be conscientious objectors, who would maybe be drawn to the military for things like scholarship money or work training, because a lot of the military complex, the people who join don't join because there is something inherently violent in their souls. They join because they need money. They join because they need access. And so if that is the driving force, our question is, how can we provide those needs differently? That is a very exciting work in progress. We are going to need some sponsors. We are going to need people with good networks, folks who know maybe some of the kids who were camping out in college quads protesting our presence in Gaza. So if that is a project, or that those are tools that you have access to, I would invite you to join. I'm also thinking about the imaginative piece and how do traumatized imaginations heal. We have recently started what is called the Lost and Found Virtual Peace Church. Every other Sunday, we are doing a quote unquote traditional service, but traditional is like a real low capital or lowercase t. It's space for folks who kind of care about peacemaking, or even are curious about it, who have heard us throw the word around and want to know more, to come share space with each other. It is on Zoom on Sunday evenings, 7 o'clock Eastern. It is very low key. We have shared leadership for worship. So if there's something you want to talk about, preach about, sing about, you're welcome to join as a leader. And if you just want to come check us out, you're always welcome to join as a participant as well. And lastly, looking forward and talking, really focusing on the issue of gun violence right now. In September, we are all going to get together in person at Massanutten Springs, which is a really beautiful conference center in Harrisonburg, Virginia, to host our Atwood Institute for Congregational Courage. That is going to offer an education for clergy and lay leaders in a range of educational, pastoral, and action strategies for gun violence prevention, particularly in the context of your congregation. My guess is we will have broad tool partners there, absolutely in resource, if not in person. And I'm seeing Mike nodding, so in person too, I assume. That is one of the on the ground ways that we will be trying to mitigate some of the violence in this country. There is a lot more going on. I don't want to run our laundry list, but check out our website, go to our events page, because there is probably a conference near you sometime this year. And there is absolutely always our online cohorts getting together to work together.
So I thank you. Presbyterian, look, people are doing work.
People are doing work.
And that work can be a source of hope, right? It can be a source of stability. It can be a source of empowerment, right? Don't be afraid to offer look, I'm a scaredy cat about everything. I'm an introvert. I'm afraid of humans, right? But you can walk into these spaces and become part of these things with little fear, right? And with little trepidation. I mean, these are welcoming spaces, right? We want your help. So please do help us. I know we're well over our hour that we suggested, as is our way here at piecing it together. But I want to give everyone a chance to just maybe give some closing remarks. If you want to offer a word of hope, if you want to offer a chance to serve, if you want to, I don't know, offer a challenge to the heart and souls of our collected consciousness, that's fine too. I'm just going to say this. I'm a minister. That's what I do. And if we believe that Jesus meant any of the stuff that Jesus said, the church has some questions to ask itself about what our role is in this moment. The church has had its ugliness, right? But it's also had its moments where it has marched for the rights of others. It has sheltered people who were trying to escape violence. The church can do those things. It can do good things. It's a reassertion, I think, of some very basic gospel values. The values of Matthew 25, perhaps, the values of Micah, the idea that we are Christian and therefore called, right, to certain things like justice and equity. Look, yes, I'm scared, right? I think anyone who is a minority of any kind is living in a state of anxiousness right now. But I'm also hopeful. because I've watched our young people stand up when standing up was needed. I've watched our youth march in the streets. I've watched our youth run for office. I've watched them make real change. I also believe that churches have a real opportunity here, to be places of sanctuary, to be places of safety, to be places of, discussion of hard issues. I know that's rough, but we got to talk about stuff. Um, you know, I am. I can't say I'm optimistic, because I know it's going to be a rough time. I know that a lot of people are going to get hurt, and it breaks my heart to think that. I think the best thing we can do is ask how we can either prevent it or help to heal it, when it occurs as people of faith. And so, we're about to have some hard conversations. I know Annika and I will be hosting these conversations in this space. Um, my advice is, yes, get to know your neighbors, understand that every human being wears the face of divinity, and walk about your world understanding that, you have the power to spread peace. And you have the power to make change in whatever tiny microcosm, uh, you know, you exist in. You don't have to change the world. You just have to change you and interact with folks around, right? So that's my closing statement. Annika, anything?
Um, yeah, I'm going to very briefly be a theologian in this group
Good,
of
yeah.
faith leaders and activists. And kind of going back to that first question of the question of human nature. And I think a lot in mitigating my own anger, my own hurt, my own distrust, around a lot, frankly, the country I live in, the community I came up in. Um, in the Reformed tradition, we hold two things to be true about human nature. One is that we are all inherently created in the image of God and thus inherently reflective of the divine. We all have a divine creative spark being facet to our presence. And simultaneous to that, we are all inherently sinful. We all have a self-destructive and other destructive drive. And both of those things are just true. And I've read a ton of theology to try to figure out how to navigate that. And for all practical purposes, I think I am just trying to go out the world remembering that both of those things are just true. Um, that is what helps keep me from losing my mind and faith and hope when I feel overwhelmed. And that is also, I think, what helps me maintain trust when it would frankly be irrational to continue to extend it. Um, I guess I share that as something that has been helpful for me in moving forward, both in the times of great despair and the times of irrational hope. And sharing it so that if it's a framework that as a person of faith you can hear and you can hold, to get through those tough eras like the one we are in today. I really do think, it's a weird complex gift, the gift to govern ourselves that we've been given. But I think when we're in touch with our real true relational roots and our understanding of selves as divine and our seeing of the divine in others, we can make it happen.
So for our guests, as I give you a chance to speak, also let us know where to find you. Let us know how to get in
Yes.
touch with you. Let us know, anything else you want us to know. Marietta, do you have anything to say here? And let us know how to find you.
Yeah. Thank you all for hosting this today and for creating this space and for continuing to create these spaces. I just shared in the chat, thepjn.org is where you can find out more about our work. We've got lots of great resources on there. Also on all the social media platforms, you can find us, especially on Instagram and Facebook, and follow the rest of our tour. And we'll have some things shared online as well that you can watch virtually if you're not in the locations that we're headed. Just as a final thought, I'm feeling we have a lot of resurrection work to do. We are a resurrection people, but that we're in the moment of the suffering and of the death before the resurrection happens. And to remind us that while not a pleasant place, and it is a dangerous place to be, this is part of the cycle that God shows us of rebirth, and we need to go through this time of pain and turmoil and loss before the new things can be born, and encourage all of us to see what things it is that we need to bury, that need to be cleared away to leave new space for good and healthy and whole things to grow. And I want to leave you all with an image. I didn't think of this when I got ready this morning, but it really connects with Mike's work. These earrings that I'm wearing are actually made out of tear gas canisters. There's an artist, a
Oh my
Palestinian
goodness.
artist in Ida refugee camp in Bethlehem, who has the kids in the camp collect tear gas canisters and other projectiles, and he turns them into earrings, jewelry, necklaces, all kinds of other art. But I should share with that Ida has the distinction of being the most tear gassed place on earth. You can go visit people there for a meal, and you have to schedule your meal time and your time outside around the tear gas times of day, because it's going to happen whether anything is going on or not. But I want to remind us also too that this tear gas canister, I'm sitting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania right now, is a product of an American company, CTS, Combined Tactical Systems, and it's a Pennsylvania company. So these earrings originated here as a weapon. They were used to terrorize people, and the people that terrorized have sent them back home with me here to Pennsylvania as art. So that's my image of resurrection that I want to leave us all with. There are some sharp edges to this still, and I think we need to lean into those in our own lives and have the courage to do that resurrection work and do that ground clearing work, with the clear eyes and clear hearts of having let go of those illusions of freedom and democracy that we've been sold, so that we can create a world where those are true things and not myths that we have built unjust systems on. So thank you all.
And as you were talking, as I turned to Mike, I'm coming to you next, so prepare yourself. I'm about to give another pitch to people buying jewelry made out of guns, right? This is the only cross I wear now. And the reason it's the only cross I wear is, first of all, my family knows gun violence personally. But second of all, this reminds me always that something that was a tool of death and darkness can be transformed into a symbol of faith and peace and hope. So, Mike, that's a great gift. And, what do you have to say as we leave?
Yeah, I think we don't exist without the artists and prophets before us who made space for the idea of something like raw tools to exist. And raw is war backwards. It speaks to the vulnerability as the opposite of war. But I also want to say that, like, to echo some comments earlier, that our small churches are fierce. Our neighborhood
Yes.
relationships can be fierce. The little things matter. And I think my non-denominational bubble was popped when I went to Israel Palestine after college, and we were at the site of the Herodian, which is basically the high at that time was the highest hill, and it was built into a fortress to protect Herod, right? But it was constructed with the labor of those around them to move dirt from second tallest hill to the next. So when we hear the scripture, faith the size of a mustard seed could move mountains, it was a political thing. So to say that following Jesus isn't political is to totally disconnect and put yourself in an unrealistic vacuum that doesn't exist. To say
Amen.
that the small things that churches and neighborhoods and interpersonal relationships can do is very important, because they aren't hyper funded, like Reverend Tyler Williams said earlier. If you're hyper funded, you can do anything. But also the things that aren't hyperfund that happen anyway are that much stronger, the weeds growing in the sidewalk. And so to hear Jesus say the faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains, to the people who were directly affected and may have been directly involved in moving one mountain to another mountain, is to say that you get to be a prophetic voice that flies in the face of this violent regime, this Christian nationalist space that we find ourselves in. So lean into the small things that you feel like may not have the power. And if you already have those relationships, like I think someone said in the chat, lean on those. Do things that help support the folks in your community who might not have that. Sometimes we feel like we need to attach ourselves to the greatest, most powerful thing to feel like we're affecting change. And that's not always true. So support the things in your community. And lastly, I'd say lean on your elders. While this situation is particularly unique, there are people who have gone through parts of this before, and they have wisdom to share with us.
No pressure, Angela, but you get the last official word before we sign out today.
Thank you. It's going to be a 3-part word. It feels appropriate to close with some words from Coretta Scott King on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day that is about violence. She says, "I must remind you that starving a child is violence. Neglecting school children is violence. Punishing a mother and her family is violence. Discrimination against a working man is violence. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical need is violence. Contempt for poverty is violence." And I have a challenge to those of us on this call. I am formed of and by Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, and I have benefited from the decades of work and people who have done this important work. And I want to challenge us, particularly those of us who are white, who call ourselves progressive, who still claim Christianity. I hear the temptation to resist and say, well, that's not us. And to really distance ourselves from white Christian nationalism, from the powers that have put the 47th president into office. And my challenge comes from some therapeutic world of like doing shadow work and seeing what is that other side. And I offer these questions from one of my favorite teachers, Jessica Vasquez Torres. She always invites us to ask, who benefits and who is harmed? And I wonder what it would be like for those of us who are white and progressive and Christian to really sit with, how are we benefiting from this moment? And who is harmed by that? And what is it that our traditions and our lineages have benefited from this culture of white supremacy, Christian nationalism, and militarism, and exploitative capitalism and colonial settlerism, like all of that? Because we have, in some ways. And rather than pushing that away and distancing and still living in a binary mindset, I wonder what it could be like to start to make peace with that and to integrate those realities and not have our immediate reaction be, oh, but I'm not like that. To say, oh, I am, and I have benefited. And because of that, here is how I'm going to move. And my last bit is that from a sacred perspective, in a sacred world, religious communities shift the culture to make reproductive justice a lived reality. So no matter what comes, we will still be creating and equipping a network of spiritual communities with liberative religious education and practices that will shift our culture to advance reproductive justice. Whoever is in office and continues to be in office, we will continue to affirm bodily autonomy and moral agency. We will continue to celebrate healthy sexuality, and we will continue to advocate for reproductive dignity to support the flourishing of all people and families. And I hope that you'll join us at sacreddignity.org. Thank you so much.
The hardest thing to face is your own hypocrisy. And we certainly all carry our little hypocrisies. And it's important to face those things. So unfortunately, Annika's computer crashed. I'm assuming out of despair. And so so she had to check out early. So I will be dismissing us today. But thank you all so much. I do truly think that where we end up is we're going to be doing the same thing we do every day, right? Which is to continue to do the work that we do, to end violence, to promote justice, to promote equity, to save lives. And I don't think that changes, regardless of elections, regardless of policies, regardless of ideologies. So there's a lot to think about here, and you guys gave us an incredible amount of food for thought. I encourage our folks who are listening to, and we did have listeners, in double digits, so we were excited about that. Seek out these folks if you're looking for ways to sort of focus your energy. Just sitting in anxiety isn't going to fix anything. And just, face it, sign up, come join us, feed your spirit, and do the work that helps to do that. And so, I think the worst thing we can do is lean into a feeling of powerlessness. We are not powerless. We will never be powerless. And so this is a hard time, but this could also become a creative time. This could become an active time. This could become a reforming of community time in a lot of ways. So thank you for reminding us that there are still people out there doing what we do, and that there are places to go. I thank you all so much. I pray peace for everyone. I bid you all peace. And I hope, we all stay well as we walk through this. God bless, and thank you.